So, what if a country's natural resources weren't just commodities to sell off, but were actually instruments of power? Today, we're diving into a really radical blueprint for Africa's economic future. And just so you know, this isn't your typical policy paper. No, this is being presented as an operational manual for sovereignty, and it proposes a complete reinvention of how the continent's incredible wealth is used. The document kicks off with this incredibly powerful line. For generations, Africa has lived in fear of her own evidence. Wow, that really sets the tone, right? The whole argument is that the continent has been sort of conditioned to see its own immense wealth. We're talking platinum, gold, diamonds, not as a strength, but almost as a liability, something that's safer to just sell off raw and let somebody else decide what it's worth. And that leads us to the core question that drives this entire blueprint. How do you stop just, selling your resources and start using them as instruments of sovereignty? It's about fundamentally changing the entire game, not just trying to get a slightly better price for your stuff. So, if you're going to build a new future, you first have to understand the past. The document starts with what it calls the standstill diagnosis, a unique historical situation that it argues has kept the continent kind of locked in a state of economic paralysis. The document uses this really provocative analogy. It compares four big settler colonial projects, the USA, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, calling them the Four Brothers. Now, it argues that while the first three pretty much succeeded in their aims, in South Africa, the resistance was so strong that it fought the project to a standstill. And this stalemate, the source claims, actually created a totally unique foundation from which a new kind of sovereignty can be built. The absolute crucial point of this whole diagnosis really boils down to one word: mismatch. The argument is that for decades, Africa has been applying economic models that were designed for manufacturing powerhouses, in the West and Asia. But because Africa's economies are fundamentally built on resources, these policies were like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It just led to this endless cycle of extraction without any real industrial transformation at home. And this table here really lays out the shift they're proposing. On the left, you've got the old policy, just simple resource extraction, a volatile currency, and an education system that's often imported and misaligned. But then on the right, you have the sovereign model. Here, resources get institutionalized, sovereign financial instruments are created to bring stability, and education is purposefully choreographed to build the exact workforce you need for these new industries. Okay, so now the blueprint moves from diagnosing the problem to this really radical act of reframing. It takes what the world often sees as a weakness for African nations, things like international sanctions, and it just flips it, arguing that these are actually their greatest strength. This is the core of that counter-narrative. The document literally says that Western sanctions, which are meant to punish and isolate, are not a death sentence. Instead, they are an emancipation. They're presented as the exact catalyst needed to force the continent to finally break its dependency and build for itself. And this reframing just keeps going. What the West calls punishment, the document calls focus. The idea here is that all this external pressure actually eliminates the distraction of foreign systems, and it forces a laser focus on developing your own internal supply chains and markets. And finally, what's called isolation is reframed as sovereignty. The argument is that this forced separation is the very space you need to forge true independence. It forces you to create new financial systems, new trade corridors, and new institutions that are completely free from outside control. So, now that the challenge has been reframed, the document gets down to the actual plan. This is where we move from the big ideas to the nuts and bolts, detailing the architecture of this new sovereign economic model. This central concept here is sovereign institutionalization. Okay, what does that mean? The idea is to stop treating a resource like platinum or manganese as just something you dig up and sell. Instead, you build an entire ecosystem of institutions around it, turning it into a strategic asset that you can then deploy for your own national development. And here's how that process breaks down into four main pillars. First, you set up commodity desks to take control of pricing and trade, so you're not relying on foreign exchanges anymore. Second, the profits get channeled into sovereign funds to be reinvested locally, not siphoned offshore. And third, these funds then support specialized trade schools and guilds, building a skilled workforce for the new industries. It's a really powerful, self-reinforcing loop.
Let's make this a little more concrete with the example of platinum. So the blueprint suggests setting up a platinum commodity desk to manage the pricing. The wealth that's generated from that would then be used to anchor a sovereign fund, which would in turn finance trade schools for, say, hydrogen technicians. And then you could leverage the platinum itself as a tool for hydrogen diplomacy with global partners. See how it all connects?
From there, the vision just scales up dramatically. This isn't just a plan for one country or one resource. It's actually designed as a replicable model, a choreography for the entire African continent. Now, the source is really deliberate with its language here. It insists it's not just some academic theory, a choreography. Well, that implies a set of carefully planned, repeatable steps that, when you perform them together, create this unified and powerful result. It's basically presenting itself as a set of instructions to follow. And this vision is apparently backed by some predictive modeling. For example, the document projects that by institutionalizing just one resource, platinum, the related hydrogen technology sector would see a 2.4 times multiplier effect. And that would create all these cascading benefits across manufacturing, skills training, and exports.
So the ultimate goal here is continental replication. The blueprint envisions this model being adopted by African Union member states for all of their key resources. This would establish Africa as the pricing authority for its own wealth and allow for the harmonization of treaties, which would let the continent negotiate as a single, powerful, unified economic bloc.
Finally, let's look at the projected outcomes. What does this all lead to? Well, according to the source, it leads to nothing less than a new fiscal order for the entire continent. This chart gives you a visual of the projected impact over a 10-year period. By replacing foreign debt with sovereign wealth that's generated from its own resources, the model projects, as you can see in these bars, a 38% reduction in debt. And by creating resource-backed instruments, it projects a 42% reduction in currency volatility. The goal is pretty clear: a stable foundation for long-term independent growth. Ultimately, the document comes right back to its defining phrase. This manuscript is not a book. It is a sovereign choreography. And that just perfectly sums up its identity. It's not meant to be a passive theory for people to debate, but an active operational plan that's designed to be implemented.
So yeah, the blueprint is ambitious, it's detailed, and it is completely unapologetic in its vision. It lays out a clear path from resource extraction to continental authorship. But as the document itself kind of suggests, the choreography is only half the battle. The ultimate question really is, can a plan like this actually be choreographed into reality? Are the dancers ready, willing, and able to perform?